The stagecoach lurched violently as the wheel hit another rut in the forgotten trail. Inside, 5 strangers clutched their belongings and exchanged wary glances as dust filtered through every crack and crevice. Clara Montgomery wiped sweat from her brow with a lace handkerchief that had long since lost its pristine whiteness. Through the small window, the endless expanse of desert shimmered under the merciless afternoon sun, distorting the horizon like a fever dream. They hadn't passed another soul in hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. How much longer? Demanded Reginald Prescott, a banker from Boston with a gold watch chain that caught the light with every jostle. His fine suit was crumpled from the 3-day journey, his patience even more so. The driver, Silas Tanner, a leathery man with eyes like flint, shouted back without turning. Depends on whether this storm holds off. He gestured toward dark clouds gathering on the horizon, his voice carrying an edge that made Clara's spine tighten. Storm? Whispered Mary Wilson, a young schoolteacher, heading west for her first position. Nobody mentioned a storm. Her knuckles whitened around her worn carpet bag. Across from Clara sat a man who called himself Smith. Just Smith. He hadn't volunteered more, and nobody had asked. His eyes never settled in one place for long, and the bulge beneath his duster suggested he wasn't traveling unarmed. Beside him, a silver-haired preacher named Reverend Holloway clutched his Bible, murmuring prayers with each violent bounce of the coach. "Storm's the least of our troubles," Smith muttered, nodding toward the window. "Been watching those riders for the past hour. 3 of them keeping pace just beyond that ridge." Clara felt her heart stutter. "Bandits?" "Maybe." Smith's hand drifted to his side. "Or something worse." The coach suddenly slowed, then lurched to a stop. The passengers exchanged alarmed glances as Tanner's boots hit the ground outside. "Everyone out," he called, his tone brooking no argument. "Wheels damaged. Need to fix it before we can continue." Clara followed the others into the blistering heat, shielding her eyes against the sun. What she saw made her breath catch. They'd stopped at the edge of what once might have been a town. A cluster of dilapidated buildings with broken windows like hollow eye sockets, their wooden bones bleached gray by countless seasons of sun and wind. "Coyote Flats," Tanner announced, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Been abandoned about 10 years now. Mine dried up, folks moved on." "Abandoned?" Mary's voice trembled. "We can't stay here. Surely we can continue." "Not with a broken axle," Tanner cut her off. "We're staying put till morning. Storm's coming anyway. Better inside than out." His eyes swept over them, calculating. "Gather what you need. That building there was once the hotel. Still has some rooms intact." As they collected their belongings, Clara noticed Smith watching Tanner with narrow eyes. The driver was studying a piece of paper, quickly folding it away when he realized Smith's attention. "Something wrong with the wheel?" Smith asked casually, too casually. "Nothing I can't fix," Tanner replied, his hand moving to rest on the shotgun beside the driver's seat. By morning, Clara followed the others toward the dilapidated hotel, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. The wind had picked up, carrying dust and the promise of rain, but something else hung in the air, something unspoken, dangerous. She glanced back at Tanner, who was now staring at their backs with an intensity that made her shiver despite the heat. Thunder rumbled in the distance as they crossed the threshold into the abandoned hotel. The floorboards creaked under their weight, protesting this unexpected resurrection of human presence. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling like funeral lace, and a thick layer of dust covered every surface. "Home sweet home," Prescott muttered sarcastically, placing his valise on what once had been a reception desk. Reverend Holloway found an old lamp, miraculously still containing a small amount of oil. The weak flame cast long shadows across the walls, revealing faded wallpaper and the ghostly outlines where paintings had once hung. "We should check the rooms upstairs," Smith suggested, his voice low. "Make sure we're alone here." "Alone?" Mary whispered, her eyes widening. "You think someone—" "Just a precaution," Smith assured her, but Clara caught the glance he exchanged with the Reverend. There was something they weren't saying. As Smith disappeared up the creaking staircase, Clara moved to a dust-covered window. Outside, Tanner was no longer working on the wheel. Instead, he stood staring up at the hotel, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Behind him, on the horizon, Clara could now make out what Smith had seen earlier. 3 riders, motionless, atop the distant ridge, watching. "I don't think the wheel is broken at all," she said quietly. The Reverend moved beside her, following her gaze. "No, my dear. I don't believe it is." His weathered hand closed around something in his pocket. "And I fear Mr. Tanner has plans for us that have nothing to do with reaching Silver Creek." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the ghost town in stark white. In that frozen moment, Clara saw Tanner smiling up at the window, a cold, calculating smile that turned her blood to ice. "He knows who we are," the Reverend whispered. "What do you mean?" Clara turned to him, confusion and fear battling for dominance. Before he could answer, Smith's voice called down from upstairs, tight with urgency. "You all need to see this. Now!" Clara followed the Reverend up the stairs, their footsteps echoing through the empty building like gunshots. They found Smith in what must have been the hotel owner's office, standing before a wall covered with yellowing wanted posters. "Seems our driver has a hobby," Smith said grimly, gesturing to the wall. Clara's heart stopped as she looked at the faces staring back from the faded papers. A younger Reverend Holloway, the banker, Prescott, Smith himself, Mary, the schoolteacher. And there, in the center, a face she'd spent years trying to forget, her own, under the name she'd abandoned long ago. "He's a bounty hunter," Smith said quietly, his hand now openly resting on his gun. "And we're his payday." Outside, thunder crashed as the storm finally broke over Coyote Flats. Rain began to pelt the broken windows like bullets, and in the momentary silence that followed, they all heard it. The unmistakable sound of the hotel's front door being barred from the outside. Clara stared at her own face on the yellowed paper, the name Rose Thornhill printed beneath it in bold letters. $5,000. Dead or alive. A lifetime ago. "This can't be right," Mary stammered, her fingers trembling as they traced her own likeness. "I'm just a schoolteacher." "Are you?" Smith challenged softly, but his eyes held no judgment. "Because according to this, Mary Wilson robbed 3 banks across Missouri before disappearing 2 years ago." The Reverend sank heavily onto a dust-covered chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "The Lord forgives all sins, but the law has a longer memory." "And a price," Prescott added bitterly, tearing his own poster from the wall and crumpling it in his fist. 15,000. I'm flattered." A crash from downstairs jerked their attention to the more immediate danger. Through the broken window, they could see Tanner dragging their luggage into a nearby building, rain plastering his clothes to his body as lightning split the sky. "He's separated us from our belongings," Smith observed. "Smart." Clara's mind raced. "Those riders you saw, probably his partners," Smith nodded, waiting for the storm to pass before collecting their payday. "We need weapons," Prescott declared, his banker's demeanor falling away like a discarded coat, revealing something harder beneath. "I have this." The Reverend pulled a small derringer from his Bible's hollowed-out center. "Not much, but it's something." 2 shots, Smith mused. "Better than none." He revealed his own revolver. 6 here, but we're still outnumbered if those riders join him. Clara moved to the window, watching Tanner through the curtain of rain. "He doesn't know we've discovered his plan. That's our advantage." "What exactly is your story?" Mary asked. Clara, still visibly shaken, 5,000 is a lot of money. Clara's jaw tightened. My husband was a cruel man. One night he was crueler than usual. They called it murder. I called it survival. Her eyes hardened with the memory. Been running ever since. Lightning illuminated the ghost town again, and in that brief moment, Clara spotted something that made her pulse quicken. The mine. What about it? Prescott demanded. Tanner said it dried up, but look. She pointed to the hillside where a mine entrance gaped like a wound in the earth. No cave-in, no barriers. If that mine has another exit, it could be our way out, Smith finished, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. A floorboard creaked downstairs. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. Someone was in the hotel. Smith motioned for silence, drawing his revolver as he crept toward the door. The Reverend positioned himself behind the desk, derringer ready, while Prescott moved to flank the entrance. Footsteps on the stairs now, slow and deliberate. Clara pulled Mary into the shadows behind a large cabinet, pressing a finger to her lips. The door swung open. Tanner stood there, rain dripping from his duster, a shotgun cradled in his arms. His eyes swept the room, narrowing when they found only the Reverend seated calmly at the desk. "Evening, Silas," the old man greeted, as if welcoming him to Sunday service. "Reverend Holloway," Tanner replied, stepping inside. "Or should I say, the gospel bandit. 30 robberies across 3 states, always leaving a Bible verse behind." His mouth twisted into a mockery of a smile. "Clever, El. The Lord works in mysterious ways," the Reverend replied evenly. "Though I suspect you're not here for spiritual guidance. Just checking on my passengers." Tanner's eyes continued scanning the room. "Making sure everyone's comfortable for the night." "Yes, very hospitable of you," the Reverend remarked dryly. "Particularly the way you locked us in." Tanner's smile vanished. "Where are the others?" Exploring their accommodations. The Reverend's hand remained steady beneath the desk. "People get restless when confined against their will." A muscle twitched in Tanner's jaw. "Don't make this difficult, old man. You're worth just as much dead as alive." "Many things are," the Reverend agreed. "Though I've found the living generally have more interesting conversations." From her hiding place, Clara watched Smith inch toward Tanner from behind the door, his footsteps masked by the driving rain against the windows. "You have until morning," Tanner stated flatly. "My associates will arrive at dawn. Behave, and you'll all face proper trials. Resist." He left the threat hanging. "And the Lord said, 'Vengeance is mine,'" quoted the Reverend. "Wrong book for the occasion," Tanner sneered, raising his shotgun slightly. "Now, where?" Smith moved like lightning, bringing his revolver down hard against Tanner's skull. The bounty hunter crumpled without a sound, his shotgun clattering to the floor. "Been wanting to do that since Tucson," Smith muttered quickly, relieving Tanner of hidden weapons, a knife from his boot, another from his belt. "Is he dead?" Mary whispered, emerging from hiding. "Just unconscious," Smith replied, binding Tanner's hands with his own belt. "But we need to move fast. No telling how long before his friends come looking." Clara retrieved the shotgun, checking its load. 2 shells, plus your 6, and the Reverend's 2. 10 shots against at least 3 men. 4, Prescott corrected, gesturing to Tanner's still form. "Not great odds," Smith acknowledged, "especially if they're expecting trouble." "Then we don't give them what they're expecting," Clara stated firmly. "We use the mine." "In this storm," Mary protested, "we could be trapped, or worse." "Better than facing certain capture at dawn," the Reverend pointed out, struggling to his feet. "I've spent enough years running to recognize when the path narrows to a single choice." They gathered what little they had, Smith taking Tanner's ammunition pouch and water canteen. Prescott found an old lantern, still functional, but desperately low on oil. What about him? Mary nodded toward Tanner. Leave him, Smith suggested. By the time he wakes, we'll be long gone. No, Clara countered, surprising herself. We take him with us. Are you mad? Prescott exploded. He's dead weight, a liability. He's our insurance, Clara explained. If his partners come early, they'll search for him first. That buys us time. And if we encounter them later, he's our bargaining chip. Smith studied her with newfound curiosity. That's cold calculation for someone who claims self-defense. Survival teaches efficiency, Clara replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. You either adapt or perish. She's right, the Reverend conceded, though carrying an unconscious man through a possibly unstable mine during a thunderstorm seems like tempting divine intervention. Then we pray the Lord has a sense of humor, Clara said, checking the hallway. Clear. Smith, you and Prescott take Tanner. Mary and I will lead with the lantern. Reverend, watch our backs. Taking charge now? Prescott bristled. Following a plan, Clara shot back. Unless you have a better one? The banker's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They descended the stairs carefully, wincing at every creak that seemed to echo through the empty hotel. Outside, the storm had intensified, turning the street into a river of mud. They would leave tracks, Clara realized, clear signs of their direction. But the rain might wash them away before dawn. The mine is northeast, she whispered, securing a threadbare curtain around her shoulders against the downpour. Stay close to the buildings for cover. They moved like shadows through the ghost town, Smith and Prescott struggling with Tanner's dead weight between them. The bounty hunter had begun to stir, moaning softly as consciousness returned. We need to gag him, Smith hissed. Clara tore a strip from her petticoat, wadding it into Tanner's mouth as his eyes fluttered. For a moment, their gazes locked, his confused, then furious as he registered his situation. She saw the promise of retribution in those flint-hard eyes, but chose to see it as confirmation they were making the right choice. Scream, she whispered to him, and it'll be your last sound. The mine entrance loomed before them, a black maw in the hillside. The weathered sign reading, Fortune's Favor Mine, hung askew, creaking in the wind like a macabre welcome. Mary held the lantern high, its weak flame struggling against the darkness. That seemed to push back physically. I don't like this, she murmured. None of us do, the Reverend consoled her, but the Lord helps those who help themselves. Convenient theology, Prescott muttered. They stepped into the tunnel, leaving the storm behind. The sudden absence of rain made their breathing seem unnaturally loud. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten dreams. Timbers groaned overhead, supporting the weight of the mountain against forces that had been working to reclaim this space for a decade. Watch for sinkholes, Smith warned, and listen for running water. Could mean an underground stream, possibly another way out. Or a way to drown, Prescott added grimly. They moved deeper, the lantern casting monstrous shadows that danced along rough-hewn walls. Mining equipment lay abandoned where workers had left it. Picks, shovels, empty ore carts on rusted tracks. That disappeared into branching tunnels. Which way? Mary asked at the first fork. Clara studied the ground, noting the lack of footprints in the thick dust. No one's been here in years. There, the Reverend pointed to faint marks on the wall. Arrows etched into the stone. Miner's markings. That one indicates a ventilation shaft. Air means a way out, Smith nodded. Good eye, Reverend. They followed the crude arrows, ducking beneath low-hanging timbers, skirting around collapsed sections where the mountain had already begun its inexorable reclamation. Behind them, Tanner had fully awakened, his eyes darting around as he assessed their situation. Clara didn't like the calculating look that crossed his face. He knew something they didn't. The tunnel widened into what had once been a major excavation chamber. Tools littered the ground around a central pit that descended into impenetrable darkness. Main shaft, Smith explained, peering over the edge. Goes down hundreds of feet. Mary nervously edged away from the pit. The arrows lead that way. She pointed to a narrower tunnel branching off to the right. As they moved toward it, a distant sound froze them in place. Voices echoing from the mine entrance, followed by the unmistakable bark of a dog. "They're early," Smith whispered, lowering Tanner to the ground. "And they brought tracking dogs," Clara added, heart sinking. No amount of rain would hide their scent now. The Reverend's weathered hand tightened on his derringer. "The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away." Tanner's eyes gleamed with triumph above his gag. Whatever secret he knew about the mine, it was about to become painfully clear to them all. Clara's mind raced, calculating distances and angles like the mathematics her father had insisted she learn before everything fell apart. The voices were growing louder. 5 minutes, maybe less, before they reached the chamber. "The shaft," she whispered. "Is there a way down?" Smith shook his head. "Not without equipment." The dog barked again, closer now. Prescott brandished the shotgun. "We fight. 10 shots against unknown numbers. Plus dogs?" the Reverend countered. "Poor stewardship of our resources." Mary had moved to the far edge of the chamber, her hands exploring the rough wall. "There's airflow here," she called softly. "Strong." They joined her, feeling the unmistakable draft of fresh air seeping through a narrow fissure barely visible in the rock face. Smith directed the lantern light into the crack, revealing a passage just wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. "Natural formation," he murmured, "not marked on any mine maps." "Can we fit?" Clara asked, already knowing they had no choice. "Barely," Smith confirmed, "but our friend here might struggle." He nodded toward Tanner, who was watching them with narrowed eyes. Clara made a swift decision. "Mary goes first, then the Reverend. Prescott, then me. Smith brings up the rear with Tanner." "And if he doesn't fit?" Prescott asked bluntly. The silence that followed held their unspoken answer. Mary removed her outer skirt, working quickly in the dim light. Left in her petticoats, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but her jaw was set with determination as she approached the fissure. "I'll scout ahead," she promised, slipping sideways into the crack. Her breathing echoed back to them, tight with controlled panic as the rock closed around her on both sides. "It widens a bit. I can move forward. There's a chamber beyond." The Reverend followed, his aged body proving more nimble than expected. "Years in the pulpit teach a man how to squeeze out of tight spots," he quipped as he disappeared into the darkness. Prescott hesitated, his larger frame presenting an obvious challenge. "I won't make it," he realized aloud. "You will," Clara insisted, helping him remove his coat. "Because the alternative isn't worth considering." Behind them, the voices had reached the first fork in the tunnel. A man shouted, his words indistinct, but his tone commanding. The dog's excited barking echoed through the mine. Prescott forced himself into the fissure, grunting with effort as the rock scraped his flesh. Halfway through, he became wedged, panic flashing across his face. "I'm stuck." Smith moved quickly, bracing his foot against the wall and pushing against Prescott's shoulders. "Exhale completely," he instructed. "Make yourself smaller." Clara turned to Tanner, who watched the scene with calculating eyes above his gag. Making a swift decision, she removed it. "How many men?" she demanded. Tanner worked his jaw. "Enough," he replied, voice raspy. "More than enough for you." "If we die in here, so do you," she reminded him. Something like respect flickered in his gaze. 3 men, 2 dogs, but Blackwater will have brought others. He always does. Blackwater? The name struck Clara like a physical blow. Jedediah Blackwater, the bounty hunter who'd tracked her across 3 states after her husband's death, the man who'd sworn to see her hang. He's been hunting you longest, Rose Thornhill, Tanner confirmed, using her old name like a weapon. Says you're his white whale. A triumphant shout from the fisher interrupted them. Prescott had broken through. Smith turned to Clara. Your turn. She hesitated, looking at Tanner. What about, I'll handle him, Smith promised, his expression leaving no doubt about what that meant if necessary. Clara nodded, then slipped into the fissure. The cold stone pressed against her from all sides, stealing her breath. For a terrifying moment, she was a child again, hidden in the root cellar, while her father searched the house in one of his drunken rages. The same suffocating darkness, the same certainty that discovery meant pain. Forcing the memory away, she inched forward. The lantern light faded behind her as Smith prepared to bring Tanner through. Ahead, she could make out voices, Mary and the others waiting in some kind of chamber. Then came the sound she'd been dreading. A gunshot echoed through the mine, followed by shouting. The hunters had found their trail. Clara pushed forward desperately, feeling the rock tear at her clothes and skin. Finally, the pressure eased, and she tumbled into an open space where the others waited. Smith? The Reverend questioned. Before Clara could answer, another gunshot rang out, much closer, followed by the scrabble of movement in the fissure. Smith appeared moments later, his face grim. Alone. Tanner? Prescott demanded. Won't be following us, Smith replied flatly. Neither. Will one of their dogs? No one asked for details. The chamber they found themselves in was natural, not man-made, a cave with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. Water dripped somewhere, the sound echoing, their breath fogged in the suddenly cooler air. Underground. River? Smith explained, directing the lantern toward a narrow channel along one wall where black water flowed silently. Probably connects to the creek outside town. Can we follow it? Mary asked. If we're desperate enough, Smith replied. Which we are. The Reverend examined the flowing water. The Lord parted the Red Sea. This seems a more modest miracle to request. They followed the underground stream, moving carefully on the slick stone. The water channel gradually widened, the ceiling lowering until they were forced to crouch. The lantern oil was dangerously low now, the flame guttering with each step. Listen, Clara whispered suddenly. Beyond the drip of water and their own breathing came another sound, rushing air and the distant rumble of the storm. An exit. Their pace quickened despite exhaustion. The passage narrowed again, the stream disappearing beneath a rock wall, but a small opening above it admitted a faint glow of pre-dawn light. We made it, Mary breathed, tears of relief cutting clean tracks down her dust-covered face. Smith examined the opening. Tight fit again, but it leads outside. Those bounty hunters will be right behind us, Prescott warned. We need a plan once we're out. Clara peered through the opening. Beyond it lay a steep ravine, the storm-swollen creek churning 20 feet below. In the dim light, she could make out the silhouettes of trees on the opposite bank. Once we cross the creek, we split up, she decided. They'll expect us to stay together. Split up? Mary echoed, dismayed. But we've come this far. And we'll go further by dividing their attention, Clara explained gently. 5 trails instead of 1. She's right, Smith agreed. Together, we're easier to track, easier to capture. The Reverend nodded solemnly. The shepherd divides his flock when wolves circle. Prescott looked unconvinced. And after? We just go our separate ways? Isn't that what we all planned anyway? Clara reminded him. New names, new lives. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Smith. I'll go first. Make sure it's clear. He squeezed through the opening, then reached back to help the others. One by one, they emerged onto a narrow ledge above the ravine as the eastern sky lightened with approaching dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. The air smelled of wet earth and possibilities. Below them, the creek had swollen to a small river, brown with churned sediment, but manageable if they were careful. There, Smith pointed to a fallen tree that formed a precarious bridge across the water. Our way out. A dog's bark echoed from the mine entrance on the hillside above, distant still, but a sharp reminder of the danger at their backs. Hurry! Clara urged, already moving toward the makeshift bridge. Smith caught her arm. Wait, before we separate. He hesitated, then pressed something into her palm. You might need this more than me. Clara looked down at a small leather pouch, heavy with ammunition for the shotgun she carried. Why? She asked, genuinely puzzled. Because you have the longest road ahead, he answered simply. Blackwater's not known for giving up. The Reverend cleared his throat. I also have something to share. From inside his coat, he produced several folded banknotes. My last ill-gotten gains. Not much, but enough for a fresh start. I can't, Mary began. Consider it tithes returned. The old man smiled. I've no more use for worldly treasures. Prescott, not to be outdone, removed his gold watch chain. Genuine gold, worth something in any town, less conspicuous than cash. Mary looked at them all with shining eyes. I have nothing to give except... She reached into her bodice and withdrew a small folded paper. My actual teaching credentials. They're real. I may have robbed those banks, but I truly was a teacher before that. Perhaps one of you can use them for a new life. Clara felt something tighten in her chest, an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. So long absent, it felt like a stranger. Thank you, she said simply, knowing more words would break the fragile moment. Smith nodded toward the bridge. Dawn's coming fast. We should move. One by one, they crossed the fallen tree, the rushing water a constant reminder of how precarious their escape remained. On the other side, they paused for a final moment together. Which way will you go? Mary asked Clara softly. Best you don't. No, Clara replied. Safer that way. The Reverend raised his weathered hands over them in a familiar gesture. May the Lord watch between me and thee, while we are absent one from another. Even Prescott bowed his head at the blessing. 20 minutes, Smith advised. Then we scatter. Different directions, different stories. They shared one last look. 5 strangers bound by secrets and survival, by a night that had transformed them from prey to conspirators to something that, in another life, might have been called friends. The distant bark of dogs spurred them into motion. Clara turned west, toward mountains still shrouded in pre-dawn shadow. She didn't look back to see which directions the others chose. Better not to know, as she'd told Mary. The ground was still wet from the storm, but the rising sun promised to dry it quickly. She needed to cover as much distance as possible before the bounty hunters picked up her trail again. Blackwater. After all this time, he was still hunting her. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, Clara found a strange clarity settling over her. She'd been running for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand firm. Perhaps it was time to stop running, to find a place not to hide, but to make a stand. The sun crested the eastern ridge, throwing long shadows across the landscape. Ahead lay wilderness, behind lay pursuit, and somewhere beyond both waited whatever future she chose to claim. Clara Montgomery, once Rose Thornhill, tightened her grip on the shotgun and walked toward the dawn, her footsteps washing away in the rain-soaked earth behind her. Clara pushed through dense underbrush, lungs burning as the mountain path steepened. The eastern sky had brightened to full dawn, and she'd long since abandoned the direct westward route she'd initially taken upon leaving the others. A straight line made for an easy trail. Instead, she'd doubled back, crossed the creek again 2 miles downstream, and begun the arduous climb into the foothills. The shotgun felt heavier with each step, its presence both comfort and curse. She'd fired guns before. Her husband had insisted every frontier wife know how, but never at a person. Not directly. Not like last night. A bird called overhead, startling her. Clara crouched instinctively, scanning the terrain below. No movement, no flashes of light that might indicate pursuit. But Blackwater would come. Of that, she harbored no illusions. Finding a rocky outcrop that offered both shelter and vantage, Clara allowed herself a moment's rest. Her throat burned with thirst, but she'd find water soon. The mountains held countless springs and streams. From her perch, the ghost town was visible in the distance, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings like scattered bones in the valley. No sign of activity, but that meant nothing. Blackwater was too clever to announce his presence. Clara's mind wandered to her unlikely companions. Had they scattered as planned, or had some already been recaptured? Mary with her false innocence, but genuine fear. Prescott, whose banker's mannerisms concealed a calculating mind. The Reverend, whose faith seemed oddly compatible with his criminal past. And Smith, the most enigmatic of them all. Smith, who'd given her extra ammunition without explanation. Smith, who'd dispatched Tanner with cold efficiency when necessary. What crime had put him on a wanted poster? She hadn't thought to ask. Movement in the tree line below snapped her attention back to the present. Not human. A deer, picking its way carefully through the forest edge. Clara watched it, envying its natural belonging in these wilds. The animal suddenly tensed, ears pricked forward, then bounded away in silent alarm. Something had spooked it. Clara pressed herself lower against the rocks, barely breathing. Seconds later, a figure emerged from the trees, a man leading a horse, moving slowly as he studied the ground. Even at this distance, she recognized the broad-brimmed hat and distinctive leather coat. Blackwater. Memory flashed unbidden, her husband's body on the cabin floor, blood pooling beneath him, the knife still clutched in her hand. Blackwater arriving. 2 days later, asking questions with those cold eyes that seemed to strip away all pretense. She'd fled that night, beginning the journey that had ultimately led her to this moment. 3 years of running, of glancing over her shoulder, of never staying in one place long enough to form connections. Now, watching him methodically tracking the forest floor, Clara felt something shift inside her. A peculiar calm descended, pushing aside the familiar panic. She was tired, bone-deep tired of being hunted. The shotgun lay within reach. At this distance, it would be useless, but the terrain offered possibilities. If she circled back, used the rocky ground to approach without leaving tracks. Clara's hand had just closed around the weapon when a distant sound stopped her. Barking dogs, coming from the direction of the creek. Her pulse quickened. They'd found one of the trails already. Blackwater's head lifted at the sound. He whistled, 2 sharp notes followed by a longer one. The barking changed direction, heading toward him. He'd called them to his position, which meant he'd found something. Clara strained to see what had caught his attention. The angle was wrong, the distance too great. But the bounty hunter's posture told her enough. The confident stance of a man who's picked up a promising trail. Her trail. Decision crystallized. The mountain path behind her led higher into increasingly rugged country. With enough of a head start, she might lose herself in the wilderness, but for how long? Days? Weeks? And then what? Another town, another false name, the cycle beginning. No. Something had to change. Clara studied the terrain between her position and Blackwater's. A narrow game trail descended through patches of scree and scattered boulders, difficult ground for horses and dogs, but navigable for someone moving carefully. If she could get close enough. She checked the shotgun again. 2 shells, plus Smith's ammunition. The odds remained terrible, but they were the best she'd had in 3 years. Taking a deep breath, Clara began her descent, moving from cover to cover with deliberate precision. Each step calculated, each handhold tested before committing her weight. The Reverend had wished God's protection over them. She hoped the Almighty was paying particular attention now. Blackwater remained focused on the ground, occasionally kneeling to examine something only he could see. The dog's barking grew louder, then stopped. They'd reached him. Clara froze as a second man emerged from the trees, leading 2 leashed hounds that strained against their restraints. "Found something?" the newcomer called. Blackwater nodded, holding up what appeared to be a scrap of fabric. Caught on a thorn bush, matches what she was wearing. Clara's hand instinctively went to her torn sleeve. Careless. She should have noticed. "Just her?" The dog handler scanned the surrounding forest. "What about the others?" "Split up." Blackwater tucked the fabric into his coat pocket. "Smart, but doesn't matter. Johnson and Peters are following the banker's trail. Too heavy to hide his tracks. The schoolteacher headed east. Ellis is on her. And the preacher? The gunman?" Blackwater's shrug was almost casual. "Old man won't last 2 days in these mountains. As for Smith..." A pause. "He's a problem for another day. The woman's our priority." The handler seemed skeptical. 5,000 versus Smith's 12? Math doesn't add up, boss. Some puzzles aren't about money. Blackwater's voice carried a bitter edge that made Clara shiver despite the warming day. "She made a fool of me once. Won't happen again." Clara inched closer, using a fallen pine as cover. 30 yards now. The shotgun wouldn't be accurate at this range, but she didn't need accuracy, just distraction. "Let the dogs work the trail," Blackwater ordered. "She's close. I can feel it." The handler unclipped the hounds' leashes. They immediately put their noses to the ground, quartering the area with practiced efficiency. One started heading toward Clara's position, then paused, confused by the scent leading in multiple directions. 25 yards. The handler noticed the dog's hesitation. "Something's wrong. Trail's muddled." "She's doubling back," Blackwater realized aloud, crossing her own path to confuse them. Clara had indeed crossed this area earlier, deliberately retracing her steps before heading up the mountain. A simple trick, but it had bought her precious minutes. 20 yards. Close enough. Her finger tightened on the trigger just as one of the dogs caught her fresh scent. Its head snapped up, eyes locking on her position as it gave a short, sharp bark of discovery. Both men turned. Clara saw the moment of recognition in Blackwater's eyes, surprise followed by grim satisfaction. No more time for plans. She fired. The shotgun's roar echoed off the mountainside. Her aim was high, intentionally so, sending pellets through the branches above the men, showering them with broken twigs and pine needles. In the moment of confusion, she chambered the second shell and fired again, this time at the ground before the dogs. The animals yelped and scattered. The handler dove for cover. Blackwater, however, barely flinched. Even as he drew his revolver, his expression registered something like approval. "Bolder than I remember, Rose," he called, using her old name like a weapon. Clara was already moving, abandoning the empty shotgun as she scrambled back up the slope. A bullet whined off rock inches from her head, spraying stone fragments that stung her cheek. She didn't look back, focusing solely on the next handhold, the next step. More shots followed, but the angle worked in her favor now. Unless Blackwater circled wide, he'd have no clean line of sight. The dogs barked frantically, their pursuit hampered by the broken ground and the lingering sting of shotgun pellets. Clara reached the outcrop where she'd rested earlier, lungs burning, legs trembling with exertion. She couldn't keep climbing forever. Eventually, the mountain would offer no more places to hide. No more paths upward. Blackwater's voice drifted up from below. "You've got one path left, Rose. It ends at the hanging tree or with a bullet. Your choice." An answering gunshot cracked. From somewhere to her right, not aimed at her but at Blackwater's position. Then another, from a different angle. Clara stared in disbelief as figures materialized from the forest. Smith on the western ridge, revolver steady in his hand. Prescott from the eastern approach, wielding what looked like Tanner's handgun. They hadn't scattered. They'd circled back. For her. 3 paths, actually, Smith called down to Blackwater. "None of them ending how you planned." The bounty hunter and his companion ducked behind trees, returning fire. The dogs circled frantically, confused by the sudden chaos. "Go!" Smith shouted to Clara between shots. "North Ridge! The Reverend's waiting!" She hesitated only a heartbeat before scrambling sideways along the outcrop, finding a narrow defile that led toward the indicated ridge. Behind her, gunfire continued to echo, covering fire, buying her time. Why? The question pounded in her mind with each step. Why had they come back? What did they gain from helping her? The path narrowed further, squeezing between towering boulders before opening onto a small plateau. There, beside a stunted pine, stood Reverend Holloway, looking impossibly calm as he held the reins of 2 horses. "Right on schedule," he greeted her, as if they were meeting for Sunday service. "How?" Clara began. "The Lord helps those who help each other," he replied, handing her the reins to a sturdy mare. "Mr. Smith suggested we might form a more effective alliance than previously considered." "Alliance?" Clara echoed, still struggling to comprehend this turn of events. The Reverend's weathered face creased into a smile. "Against mutual adversaries, Mr. Smith has an extraordinary talent for strategic thinking." The gunfire below had diminished to occasional, sporadic shots. "They'll be joining us momentarily," the Reverend assured her, checking the cinch on his saddle. "Assuming all goes according to plan." "And Mary?" Clara asked, mounting the horse with practiced ease despite her exhaustion. The old man pointed toward a distant trail that wound along the mountainside. "Establishing our diversionary route. Quite the actress, our Miss Wilson. Currently playing the role of 5 separate fugitives, leaving signs for our pursuers to follow in entirely wrong directions." Clara shook her head in wonder. "Why? Why risk yourselves for me?" "Perhaps we're not risking ourselves for you," the Reverend suggested mildly. "Perhaps we're investing in a more promising future for all concerned." More gunshots, closer now. Then, the thunder of hooves as Smith and Prescott emerged from the tree line below, riding hard. Behind them, far enough to be no immediate threat but close enough to maintain pursuit, came Blackwater and 2 of his men. "Time to depart," the Reverend declared, swinging into his saddle with surprising agility for his age. "The Lord may provide, but he also expects us to make haste when circumstances warrant." Clara needed no further encouragement. She dug her heels into the mare's flanks, following the Reverend along a ridge trail that hadn't been visible from below. As they crested the rise, the full panorama of the wilderness spread before them. Endless forests, distant mountains, and somewhere beyond, possibilities she hadn't dared imagine since the night she'd first fled her old life. The path ahead remained dangerous, the future uncertain. But for the first time in 3 years, Clara realized she wasn't facing it alone. They rode hard for hours, following game trails and forgotten paths that only the Reverend seemed to know. The old man led with quiet confidence, occasionally consulting a small, battered compass before adjusting their course. The horses, trail-hardened and sure-footed, navigated the difficult terrain without complaint. "Where did these mounts come from?" Clara finally asked as they paused to rest in a sheltered ravine. The question had been gnawing at her since their escape. Smith dismounted fluidly, checking his horse's legs with practiced hands. "Found them tethered behind the abandoned livery stable," Seems our friend Tanner planned ahead. You stole Blackwater's horses? Clara couldn't hide her admiration. Commandeered, Prescott corrected primly, though his eyes held unexpected humor. Legal distinction? The Reverend chuckled softly. The good book speaks of borrowing from Egyptians before a hasty departure. Precedent exists. A bird call pierced the air. 3 notes. Pause. 2 notes. Smith instantly raised his hand for silence, then returned the call with a slightly different pattern. Moments later, Mary emerged from the trees above them, looking remarkably composed despite smudges of dirt on her face and tears in her skirt. They took the bait, she reported, sliding down the embankment to join them. Following false trails in 3 different directions. All of them? Smith pressed. Mary's expression turned grave. Not Blackwater. He split from the others about an hour ago, heading west. She glanced at Clara. He knows we're together. The momentary elation of their escape deflated like a punctured water skin. Clara turned away, fighting the familiar weight of guilt. I've endangered you all. Again. A rough hand clasped her shoulder, Prescott's, surprisingly gentle despite his banker's facade. Don't be dramatic. We all made choices. Indeed, the Reverend concurred. Though perhaps it's time Mr. Smith shared the full scope of his particular choice with our company. All eyes turned to Smith, who was busy redistributing supplies among their saddlebags with methodical precision. He worked for several moments, in silence before acknowledging their attention. Blackwater isn't just hunting bounties, he finally said, voice deliberately casual. He's eliminating witnesses. To what? Mary asked, though Clara suspected she already knew the answer. To who he really is. Smith secured a final strap before facing them. The notorious Carson City bank robbery 3 years ago. 7 people. Killed, including 2 children. Largest haul of gold bullion ever taken in the territory. Clara remembered newspaper headlines, wanted posters featuring masked men, the nationwide manhunt that had occupied lawmen for months. The ghost gang, Prescott whispered. They were never caught. One was, Smith corrected. Thomas McGrath, captured in Tucson, scheduled to hang. Night before his execution, he confessed to a prison chaplain. The Reverend's weathered face showed dawning comprehension. Named names? Smith nodded. Including the mastermind who planned it all, took the lion's share, then vanished to establish a respectable new identity. His gaze locked with Clara's. A bounty hunter named Jedediah Blackwater. The revelation hit like a physical blow. That's why he wants me dead, Clara realized aloud. Not for killing my husband, but because your husband knew, Smith finished. Nathan Thornhill was the bank's security consultant. He must have recognized something about the robbery, something that pointed to Blackwater. Memories cascaded through Clara's mind, her husband's increasing paranoia in the weeks before his death, the locked study where he spent long hours with papers spread across his desk, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the room. She'd attributed it all to his growing instability, his worsening temper. He was building a case, she murmured. That's why Blackwater came that night, not for any bounty. And found you instead, Smith concluded, with Nathan already dead by your hand. Convenient timing. He wanted the evidence, Clara continued, the pieces finally aligning. Tore the cabin apart looking for it. I thought he was just being thorough about the killing. Did he find what he was looking for? Prescott asked, the banker's instinct for valuable information asserting itself. Clara closed her eyes, remembering. I don't know. I was in shock, barely aware of what was happening. A detail surfaced suddenly. But there was something. A small leather journal Nathan always carried. Blackwater seemed particularly interested in that. And now he hunts all. Of us, the Reverend observed grimly. 5 separate loose ends to tie off. Why now? Mary wondered. It's been years. Because McGrath finally talked, Smith explained. Word is spreading among lawmen, questions being asked. Blackwater needs to eliminate anyone who might corroborate the story or provide additional evidence. So we're not just running from a bounty hunter, Prescott summarized, but from a mass murderer protecting his identity and a fortune in stolen gold, which rather changes our strategic considerations, the Reverend noted, absently stroking his silver beard. Clara studied Smith, seeing him clearly for the first time. You're not a wanted man at all, are you? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The poster was convincing, though. U.S. Marshal, Prescott deduced, eyes narrowing. Undercover. Smith neither confirmed nor denied, but his silence was answer enough. That's why you gave me extra ammunition, Clara said softly. You were using me as bait to draw Blackwater out. Call it a mutually beneficial arrangement, Smith replied, unrepentant. You want freedom from pursuit. I want Blackwater facing justice. Mary moved protectively closer to Clara. Using her as bait hardly seems like justice. Neither does letting Blackwater continue his hunt, Smith countered. We needed something he wants badly enough to make mistakes. That's Clara. The directness of his admission should have angered her, but Clara found herself nodding slowly. You're right, I'm tired of running. She straightened her shoulders. So we stop running. We make our stand. With what resources? Prescott demanded. 5 people against Blackwater and his men? Poor odds for a banker's investment? 4 people, Smith corrected. Mrs. Montgomery, Clara, will be elsewhere. I just said I'm done running, she protested. Not running, Smith assured her. Remembering. For the second time that day, Clara found herself confused by an unexpected turn of events. Remembering what? Everything about your husband's investigation. Everything about that night. Every detail you saw in his study. Every conversation you overheard. Every place he might have hidden evidence. Understanding bloomed. You think, there's still proof out there, something Blackwater missed. I think Nathan Thornhill was smart enough to create insurance, Smith confirmed. Men like him don't make accusations against powerful figures without protection. The Reverend nodded sagely. The prudent see danger and take refuge. My cabin was burned to the ground after I fled, Clara pointed out. There's nothing left. Perhaps not there, Smith agreed. But somewhere. A bank deposit box. A trusted friend. A hidden cache. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Nathan had been secretive, calculating, untrusting, even of her. Especially of her, toward the end. Where would he have kept something? Valuable? Something incriminating? A memory surfaced. Nathan returning late one night, muddied boots beside the door, an unusual lightness to his mood as he pocketed a small key. She'd thought little of it then, preoccupied with hiding fresh bruises from their latest argument. There might be something, she said slowly. A silver mine he invested in. Failed venture, but he kept the claim. Visited it occasionally. Said he was monitoring equipment, but he always went alone. Smith's eyes sharpened with interest. Where? 3 days' ride from here. Ghost Ridge territory. The name silenced them all momentarily. Ghost Ridge was notorious, lawless, unforgiving. Country controlled by outlaws and renegades who answered to no authority. Perfect place to hide something valuable, Prescott finally remarked. No one asks questions. Or perfect trap, Mary countered. Blackwater could be expecting this very plan. Smith considered both perspectives, then reached a decision. We split up. Prescribed rendezvous points, alternate routes. Mary and the Reverend create distractions. Keep Blackwater's remaining men occupied. Prescott accesses his banking connections, researches anything connecting Blackwater to the Carson City robbery. And us? Clara asked. already knowing the answer. "We find that mine," Smith stated simply, "and whatever your husband left there." The plan was audacious, dangerous, and offered the first real hope Clara had felt in years. Not just escape from pursuit, but vindication, justice, and perhaps even redemption. "What if there's nothing there?" she asked quietly. Smith checked, his revolvers with methodical precision. "Then we move to Plan B." "Which is?" His expression hardened slightly. "Make ourselves the bait that catches a killer." The Reverend rose stiffly, dusting off his worn trousers. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, but I find his justice often requires human hands to manifest." He surveyed their unlikely company. "Strange instruments we may be, but perhaps purpose-made for this moment." They spent the remaining daylight, hours refining details, planning rendezvous points, establishing signals and contingencies. As dusk approached, Prescott distributed the remaining provisions from Tanner's saddlebags: jerky, hardtack, coffee beans, and a small flask of whiskey that the Reverend accepted with surprising enthusiasm for medicinal purposes. Their paths would diverge at dawn. Mary and the Reverend heading north to create false trails and spread rumors that would reach Blackwater's ears. Prescott east to the nearest telegraph office with access to banking records. Clara and Smith southwest toward Ghost Ridge and whatever secrets awaited in Nathan Thornhill's abandoned mine. As night settled over their camp, Clara found herself standing apart from the others, watching stars emerge above the jagged mountain peaks. The enormity of what lay ahead pressed upon her, not just continuing flight, but deliberate confrontation with the man who'd haunted her nightmares for years. Footsteps approached, Smith, moving quietly despite the rocky ground. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, offering her the whiskey flask. Clara accepted it, taking a small sip that burned away some of the evening chill. "Trying to reconcile the woman I was with, the woman I need to be." "They're not so different." She glanced at him sharply. "You didn't know me before." "I know enough." He reclaimed the flask. "Woman who survives what you have doesn't lose her core self, just adds layers of protection around it." The observation cut closer to truth than Clara liked to admit. "Is that the Marshal's assessment?" A hint of genuine amusement crossed his face. "Just Smith's." "Is Smith even your name?" "It is now." He pocketed the flask. "Names change. People rarely do." Clara considered this. "Then who am I beneath all these layers? Rose Thornhill, the abused wife? Clara Montgomery, the fugitive? Some ghost of both, running endlessly?" Smith studied her for a long moment before answering. "You're whoever decides to stop running." The simplicity of his response resonated unexpectedly. Who would she be when the running finally stopped? The question had no answer yet, but for the first time in years, Clara felt something like anticipation, rather than dread when considering the future. "Dawn comes early," Smith reminded her, turning back toward camp. "Try to rest." Clara remained a moment longer, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Tomorrow, they would ride into danger by choice, rather than necessity. The path ahead remained fraught with peril, the outcome uncertain, but something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer merely fleeing from her past. She was moving toward something new: justice, truth, perhaps even freedom. And she wasn't moving alone. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that echoed across the empty spaces between mountains. Another answered from somewhere closer, then another joined, their voices blending into something less desolate than their solo calls. Clara listened until the howling faded, then turned back toward the circle of her unlikely allies. Tomorrow's dangers would come soon enough. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she would sleep without one eye open, trusting others to keep watch. It felt strangely like coming home. Ghost Ridge appeared on the horizon late on the third day. a jagged line of pale stone formations that resembled skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Clara and Smith had ridden hard, stopping only when necessary, speaking little. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but rather the efficient quiet of two people conserving energy for challenges ahead. They made camp in a sheltered arroyo, far enough from established trails to avoid casual discovery. Smith built a fire small enough that its smoke would disperse before reaching the height where it might be spotted. Clara tended the horses, her movements practiced and sure despite her exhaustion. "Tomorrow we enter outlaw country," Smith said, finally breaking their companionable silence as he passed her a tin cup of coffee. Clara accepted it gratefully, letting the bitter warmth thaw her wind-chilled fingers. "How will we find the mine? Ghost Ridge has dozens scattered throughout." "You're certain your husband never mentioned its name? Location?" She shook her head. Nathan was deliberately vague, part of his nature. Her mouth twisted with old bitterness. "He enjoyed holding knowledge others lacked," Smith nodded, unsurprised. "Men who crave control often hoard information." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "What about land records? Deed of ownership?" "Possibly in Carson City. He handled all business matters through a lawyer there." "Carson City's too far, and too dangerous. Blackwater has connections there." Smith poured the dregs of his coffee onto the ground. "We'll need another approach." Clara stared into the small fire, memory stirring. There was something, after his last trip, he came home, with a map. She closed her eyes, willing the details to surface. "I glimpsed it when he was packing to leave again. Distinctive marking. A rock formation shaped like a raven in flight." Smith's interest sharpened. "Could you recognize it?" "Yes." The certainty in her voice surprised them both. "Good. We scout at first light. Sleep while you can." Clara settled into her bedroll, but sleep proved elusive. The stars wheeled overhead, brilliant and cold in the clear mountain air. She wondered about the others, Mary and the Reverend creating their distractions, Prescott accessing banking records. Had they succeeded? Were they safe? "They know what they're doing," Smith said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Even Mary? She seems so—" Clara trailed off, searching for the right word. "Young? Innocent?" Smith's mouth quirked. "Bank robbers rarely succeed through inexperience." "Who is she really?" Smith hesitated, then relented. "Mary Wilson started as Mary Thorne, daughter of a St. Louis banker. Excellent education, privileged upbringing. Then her father gambled away the family fortune and shot himself, left Mary and her mother destitute. Clara absorbed this. So she turned to robbery. Not immediately. Worked as a governess, then a teacher. When her mother fell ill, needed expensive treatments." He shrugged. "Found she had a talent for planning, for seeing vulnerabilities in systems. Never hurt anyone during her robberies." "Unlike Blackwater." "Unlike Blackwater," Smith agreed darkly. Clara turned toward him, propping herself on one elbow. "Ann Prescott? The Reverend?" Prescott embezzled from his own bank. Clever scheme. Might never have been caught if a jealous colleague hadn't noticed. Discrepancies. Smith tossed another small branch onto the fire. "The Reverend's story is his to tell, if he wishes." "And yours?" Clara pressed, pushing against the boundary of their unspoken agreement not to delve too deeply into pasts. The firelight cast Smith's features in sharp relief, shadows emphasizing the lines experience had etched around his eyes. Started as a Texas Ranger. Moved to U.S. Marshal Service after the war. Specialized in undercover work. He met her gaze directly. "Lost my family to men like Blackwater. Men who believed themselves above consequence." The simple statement held such weight that Clara found herself momentarily speechless. When she finally responded, her voice was gentle. "I'm sorry." He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Justice doesn't bring them back. but it matters all the same. They lapsed into silence again, each wrapped in private memories. Clara felt a peculiar sense of connection to this man whose real name she didn't even know, a shared understanding that transcended conventional acquaintance. "We should be enemies by rights," she observed softly. "The lawman and the fugitive." "Law doesn't always equal justice." Smith's expression remained unreadable. "Sometimes they run parallel. Sometimes they diverge. And which path are we on now?" His eyes reflected the flickering flames. "We'll know when we reach the end." Dawn broke with the particular clarity unique to high desert elevations. They struck camp efficiently, leaving minimal evidence of their presence. As they mounted, Clara noticed Smith checking his weapons with extra care. "Expecting trouble?" "Always." He tucked a derringer into his boot. "Ghost Ridge territory has unwritten rules. Strangers aren't welcome without purpose or protection." "We have purpose," Clara pointed out. Smith's expression hardened. "We'll need protection, too." They rode northwest along the base of the ridge, constantly scanning for the distinctive raven-shaped formation Clara remembered. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, dotted with abandoned equipment and occasional sun-bleached bones. Whether animal or human, Clara preferred not to speculate. Near midday, they encountered their first Ghost Ridge residents, 3 riders, watching from an elevated outcrop, making no effort to conceal their surveillance. Smith maintained their course, neither accelerating nor slowing. "Don't stare, but don't look away if they approach," he advised quietly. "Show neither fear nor challenge." "Friends of yours?" Clara kept her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "No such thing in Ghost Ridge, only temporary alliances and potential threats." The watchers eventually disappeared behind a bend in the ridge. But Clara felt unseen eyes tracking their progress throughout the afternoon. They continued their search methodically, exploring each promising canyon and draw, finding several abandoned mines but nothing matching her recollection. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, fatigue and frustration mounted. They dismounted beside a small seep spring to rest the horses. "We need somewhere defensible for the night," Smith decided, surveying the increasingly shadowed landscape. Clara nodded, then froze as something caught her peripheral vision. "Wait." She turned slowly, orienting herself to the angle of the setting sun. There, silhouetted against the reddening sky, stood a formation exactly as she remembered. A jutting spire with a horizontal projection that created the unmistakable profile of a raven in flight. Smith followed her gaze. "You're certain?" "Absolutely." They approached cautiously, alert for any signs of recent activity or habitation. The raven formation marked the entrance to a narrow canyon, its walls rising steeply on either side, perfect for ambush or defense. 50 yards in, they found it, a mine entrance partially concealed by strategically placed boulders. Above the timber-reinforced opening, a crude carving depicted a rose, easily mistaken for a simple decorative element, yet unmistakable to Clara. "Nathan's sign for me," she explained, throat unexpectedly tight. "He used it in notes, letters." Smith examined the entrance with professional thoroughness. "No recent tracks. Support's still solid. Someone maintained this." Clara dismounted, drawn inexorably toward this remnant of her former life. "Nathan came here regularly, said he was monitoring equipment, or something more valuable." Smith secured the horses, then checked his revolver. "I'll go first. Stay close, but be ready to ride if trouble appears." The mine entrance opened into a tunnel surprisingly free of debris or cave-ins. Smith lit a small lantern he'd carried in. His saddlebag, its glow revealing well-maintained support beams and a floor cleared of obstacles. Not abandoned, but preserved. They advanced cautiously, the tunnel gradually descending. Clara fought against claustrophobic memories of the fissure in Coyote Flats. focusing instead on Smith's steady presence ahead. Approximately 200 yards in, the passage widened into a chamber reinforced with heavy timbers. Mining equipment stood in orderly arrangements, covered with oilcloth to protect against dust and moisture. Nathan was meticulous, Clara observed. Everything in its place. Smith nodded, examining a separate tunnel branching from the main chamber. This operation was never profitable, you said? Failed venture, according to Nathan. Minimal silver. Deposits. Not worth extraction costs. Then why maintain it so carefully? Smith raised the lantern higher, illuminating another passage on the opposite wall. And why build multiple extensions? Realization dawned. It wasn't about mining at all. No. Smith moved toward what appeared to be a crude desk constructed from wooden crates. It was about having a secure, private location. Question is, for what? The desk's surface held only dust, but closer inspection revealed something Clara would have missed. A nearly invisible seam in the wooden surface. Smith traced it with his fingertip, then applied pressure to one corner. A hidden compartment sprang open. Inside lay a small brass key. Clara recognized it instantly. That's it, the key I saw Nathan with that night. Smith lifted it carefully. Key to what? They searched the chamber methodically, checking walls for hidden caches, floors for trapdoors. Nothing. Smith's expression grew increasingly frustrated as each potential hiding place yielded nothing. We're missing something, he muttered, returning to the desk. Clara stood in the center of the chamber, trying to see it through Nathan's eyes. What would he have valued? Where would he have felt secure storing something incriminating? Her gaze settled on the equipment, specifically a heavy iron ore cart positioned against the far wall. There, she said suddenly. The cart. Nathan always believed the obvious hiding place was often the safest, hidden in plain sight where no one would think to look. Smith helped her push the surprisingly heavy cart aside, revealing a metal strongbox embedded in the stone floor. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside lay exactly what they'd hoped for: a leather-bound journal, several folded documents with banking seals, and a small canvas pouch that clinked metallically when Smith lifted it. Gold coins, he confirmed, weighing the pouch in his palm. Samples, most likely. Evidence from the robbery. Clara opened the journal with trembling fingers. Nathan's precise handwriting filled the pages. Dates, names, transactions. Midway through, one name began appearing with increasing frequency: J. Blackwater. He was building the case, Clara whispered, connecting Blackwater to the robbery step by step. Smith examined the banking documents. Transfer records. Blackwater moving funds through multiple accounts. Different names. Clever, but not clever. Enough to hide from someone looking specifically for the pattern. Nathan figured it out. Clara's voice held wonder rather than grief. He actually did it. And died for it. Smith's tone was grim as he carefully returned everything to the strongbox. This is what Blackwater was searching for. Enough evidence to hang him 10 times over. A sound from the tunnel entrance froze them both, the unmistakable click of a gun hammer being cocked. Enough evidence indeed, came a familiar voice from the shadows. I've been waiting a long time to recover that. Jedediah Blackwater stepped into the lantern light, revolver trained unwaveringly Bond Smith. Behind him stood 2 armed men, their expressions suggesting they'd be perfectly comfortable shooting first and asking questions never. Careless of you not to post a lookout, Blackwater chided, as if scolding children. Though, in fairness, my men have been tracking you since you entered Ghost Ridge territory. Smith's hand hovered near his gun. Don't, Blackwater warned. My associates aren't as patient as I am. They'll shoot Mrs. Thornhill first, should you try anything heroic. Clara looked into the eyes of the man who'd haunted her nightmares for 3 years. They were exactly as she remembered, cold, calculating, utterly without mercy. How did you find us? She asked, playing for time as she desperately searched for options. Blackwater's smile never reached those eyes. You led me here, my dear. Just as I always knew you would. He gestured toward the strongbox. Now, if you'd be so kind, my property, please. Evidence isn't property, Smith countered, his posture deceptively relaxed despite the tension Clara could sense coiling within. Him. Semantics, Blackwater dismissed. The box, now. As Smith reluctantly reached for the strongbox, Clara noticed something he couldn't see from his position. A flicker of movement in the deeper tunnel behind Blackwater. A shadow shifting against deeper shadow. They weren't alone. Clara kept her expression neutral, giving no indication she'd noticed the movement. Instead, she fixed her attention on Blackwater, mind racing to identify any possible advantage. All this effort, she said, deliberately drawing his focus. Years of pursuit. Was it worth it? Blackwater studied her with cold amusement. You know, in a peculiar way, I've come to admire your persistence, Mrs. Thornhill. Most would have broken long ago. I'm not most people. Evidently not. His gaze shifted to Smith. And you, playing Marshall while hunting me. Ironic. We're not so different. Smith's voice remained level. We're nothing alike. No? We both pursue with single-minded determination. We both wear whatever mask serves our purpose. Blackwater gestured with his revolver. The strongbox. Last warning. The shadow behind Blackwater's men shifted again, more distinctly this time. Clara struggled to keep her eyes from tracking the movement. Smith, sensing her tension, subtly positioned himself to block Blackwater's view of her face. The evidence won't disappear with us, Smith said, buying precious seconds. Too many people know now. Blackwater's expression hardened. A problem. Easily solved. Ghost Ridge has many abandoned mines. Bodies are rarely found. Figured you for many things, Smith replied. Didn't take you for a coward. The barb struck its target. Anger flashed across Blackwater's features. A man who plans carefully isn't a coward. A man who murders children is, Clara interjected, remembering the Carson City robbery victims. 2 of them. Innocents. Collateral damage, Blackwater dismissed coldly. Unavoidable in our line of work. Our line of work? Smith's disgust was palpable. Don't pretend your hands are clean, Marshall. Men like us make difficult choices. That's where you're wrong, Smith replied. Some choices aren't difficult at all. As if his words were a signal, the shadows behind Blackwater erupted into motion. A figure lunged forward. Prescott, wielding a mining pick with grim determination. He caught one of Blackwater's men squarely between the shoulder blades. The man crumpled without a sound. In the instant of shock that followed, Smith moved with practiced efficiency, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Blackwater's second man staggered, clutching his chest. Blackwater himself reacted with the speed of a rattlesnake, diving sideways as he squeezed off 2 wild shots. The confined space amplified the gunfire to deafening levels. Clara dropped, instinctively, scrambling toward the desk for cover. The lantern shattered, plunging the chamber into darkness broken only by muzzle flashes. Smith fired again, the brief illumination revealing Blackwater retreating toward the tunnel entrance. Prescott engaged the wounded man in a desperate struggle. "Smith!" Clara called. "He's escaping!" Through the confusion came another voice, Marries, from somewhere in the tunnel. "East Passage blocked!" Blackwater snarled an obscenity, firing blindly toward Mary's voice. Reverend Holloway's unmistakable baritone answered from yet another direction. "The Lord welcomes sinners who repent. My son." Others face his judgment. They had him surrounded. Smith produced a match, striking it against the wall to create a tiny island of light. "Surrender, Blackwater. Nowhere left to run." The bounty hunter's laugh echoed through the chamber. "Always. Another path for those willing to make sacrifices." He directed his next words to Clara. "Your husband learned that too late." Before anyone could react, Blackwater aimed his revolver at the chamber's main support beam and fired 3 rapid shots. Wood splintered. Dust billowed from the ceiling as ominous creaking filled the space. "Collapse!" Smith shouted. "Out! Now!" Prescott had subdued his opponent and was already dragging the unconscious man toward the exit. Mary appeared at Clara's side, pulling her toward safety. The Reverend's voice called directions from the main tunnel, guiding them through the sudden chaos. Stone and timber groaned overhead as the ancient mountain stirred. Clara stumbled in the darkness, feeling Smith's steadying hand at her back. Blackwater had vanished in the confusion, escaping or trapped, impossible to determine. They half ran, half crawled up the sloping tunnel as the mountain shuddered around them. Behind came the thunderous roar of collapsing sections, each concussion driving them forward with renewed desperation. Light appeared ahead, the blessed gray of twilight marking the mine entrance. They burst into the open air moments before the final collapse, dust billowing from the tunnel mouth like the death rattle of some great beast. Clara bent double, coughing, lungs burning as she gulped clean air. Around her, the others did the same. Smith, Mary, Prescott, and the Reverend, all filthy but alive. Even Blackwater's unconscious henchman had survived, now securely bound with leather straps from Prescott's saddle. "Blackwater?" Smith asked between coughs. Prescott shook his head. "Didn't pass me." "Nor us," Mary confirmed, gesturing to include the Reverend. They stared at the sealed mine entrance, dust still settling on the fresh rubble. No one spoke the obvious conclusion. "The strongbox?" Reverend Holloway finally asked. Smith patted his coat, producing the journal and documents. "Essentials. Left the gold." Clara felt a weight lift from her chest. The evidence had survived. Even if its hiding place hadn't. Nathan's work, his final legacy, would serve justice after all. "How did you find us?" she asked, turning to the others. Mary smiled tiredly, brushing dust from her skirts. "Prescott's banking connections. Nathan Thornhill's mine deed was registered under a false name, but the description matched what you remembered." "Arrived yesterday," Prescott added, adjusting his torn jacket with something of his old fastidiousness. "Been watching for Blackwater's men. When they moved in behind you, the Lord provided an opportunity," the Reverend finished. "And we availed ourselves of it." Clara surveyed these unlikely allies, a former bank robber, an embezzler, an outlaw preacher, and a lawman whose true name she still didn't know. People who had risked everything for justice and, perhaps, for her. "We should move," Smith interrupted her thoughts. Other associates of Blackwater might still be nearby. They retrieved their horses from where Smith had hidden them among the rocks. The Reverend and Mary had acquired mounts of their own. "Borrowed," Mary explained with a mischievous glint reminiscent of her former profession, as they prepared to depart. Clara paused for one final look at the collapsed mine entrance, Nathan's secret repository, and now, presumably, Blackwater's tomb. She felt oddly empty, as if the mountain had swallowed more than just her pursuer. "Doesn't seem real," she murmured to Smith, who had drawn his horse alongside hers. "That it's over." His weathered face held neither triumph nor relief, just the solemn acknowledgement of a necessary task completed. Justice often feels hollow in the moment. Is that what this is? Justice? For the victims in Carson City? For your husband? Smith adjusted his hat against the setting sun. Perhaps? For you? Clara considered the question, searching her heart for the answer. For me, it's freedom. She straightened in the saddle. Where do we go from here? The question held multiple meanings, and from Smith's expression, he understood them all. First to Carson City, he replied. The evidence needs to reach a federal judge. Your testimony will be required. And after? Something softened in his eyes. That depends. On what? On whether Clara Montgomery wants her name cleared officially. Rose Thornhill could reclaim her life, her identity. The possibility struck her with unexpected force. She'd lived so long as a fugitive. The concept of returning to her former self seemed almost incomprehensible. And if she doesn't? Clara asked, carefully. If she prefers to remain Clara? Smith's gaze held hers steadily. Then perhaps Clara might consider a different path. The territorial governor needs agents who can move quietly, observe carefully. Skills you've demonstrated admirably. You're offering me a job? As what, a spy? Special consultant to the U.S. Marshal's office. His lips quirked in the closest thing to a full smile she'd yet seen from him. Legitimate employment with interesting colleagues. Clara glanced at the others, now ready to ride. Mary with her always keen intelligence and chameleon adaptability. Prescott, whose financial acumen saw patterns others missed. The Reverend, whose benign appearance concealed remarkable resourcefulness. All of you? She asked, understanding dawning. My particular division employs those with diverse backgrounds, Smith acknowledged. Second chances for those who've earned them. The offer hung between them. Not just employment, but belonging, purpose, legitimacy. Things Clara had believed forever beyond her reach. Before she could respond, a distant sound caught their attention. Hoofbeats approaching from the north. Many horses riding hard. Company, Prescott warned, his hand dropping to his gun. Smith squinted into the fading light. Too many to fight. 8, maybe 10 riders. Blackwater's reinforcements? Mary asked, already turning her horse. Likely. Smith made a swift decision. Split up, 3 directions. Meet at Cottonwood Spring in 2 days. The Reverend nodded grimly. The Lord helps those who help themselves to a hasty departure. As they prepared to separate, Clara made her own decision. I'm riding with you, she told Smith, leaving no room for argument. Something passed between them. Understanding, respect, perhaps something more. He nodded once, then addressed the others. Godspeed. They scattered like wind-blown seeds. Mary, and the Reverend northwest toward the territorial border, Prescott due south with their prisoner, Smith and Clara east along a rocky ridge where their tracks would be difficult to follow. As Clara urged her horse to greater speed, adrenaline coursing through her veins, she found herself smiling despite the danger. Whatever came next, pursuit, confrontation, eventual justice, she faced it not as a victim or a fugitive, but as something new. A woman who had stopped running and chosen her path at last. Darkness enveloped them as they crested the ridge, the Yow, first stars appearing overhead. Behind them, Ghost Ridge receded into shadow, secrets and threats alike buried beneath its stony facade. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and possibility. Clara Montgomery rode into that darkness without fear, the rhythm of hoofbeats beneath her matching the steady beat of her heart. For the first time in years, both carried her toward something rather than away. Blackwater might have escaped. Other dangers would certainly arise. But tonight, under the vast desert sky, Clara rode as a free woman, choosing her direction, her companions, her future. Tonight, that was enough. That was enough. Cottonwood Spring emerged from the desert like a mirage, a verdant oasis sheltered by ancient trees and weathered stone. Clara and Smith arrived as sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, dappling the clear pool with shifting patterns of gold. Their horses drank gratefully after the hard 2-day ride across unforgiving terrain. No sign of pursuit since yesterday, Smith noted, scanning their back trail with practiced vigilance. Either we lost them, or they weren't following us specifically. Clara splashed water on her dust-coated face. You think they went after the others? Possibly. Prescott had their man. Higher priority target. The prisoner they'd captured in... The mine might indeed have drawn their pursuers south. Clara hoped Prescott's banker's instincts for self-preservation had served him well. She'd grown oddly attached to his fussy mannerisms and unexpected bravery. "Will the others make it?" she asked, voicing the concern that had shadowed their journey. Smith's expression revealed nothing. "Mary's clever, Reverend's resourceful, Prescott's determined. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one." He unsaddled his horse with efficient movements. "We'll know soon enough." They established a small camp in a sheltered hollow, where firelight wouldn't be visible from a distance. Despite her exhaustion, Clara insisted on taking first watch. Smith didn't argue, merely nodded and settled against his saddle, hat tipped over his eyes in a posture of relaxation that didn't entirely mask his readiness. Clara positioned herself on a flat rock overlooking both the spring and their approach route. The night deepened around her, desert stars emerging with breathtaking clarity. She found herself cataloging constellations as she'd done as a child, before her life had narrowed to survival and escape. Near midnight, Smith silently joined her, offering coffee from a battered tin cup. "Your watch isn't for another hour," she observed, accepting the steaming liquid. "Sleep's overrated." He settled beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. Particularly with unfinished business, they hadn't discussed Blackwater's possible survival since leaving Ghost Ridge. The mine collapse had been catastrophic, the tunnel thoroughly sealed, yet neither had been willing to declare him definitively dead. Men like Blackwater seemed to possess unnatural resilience, cockroaches surviving what would kill ordinary men. "You think he made it out somehow?" Clara stated, rather than asked. Smith stared into the darkness. "I've learned to expect the worst of men like him." "And prepare accordingly?" His smile was barely visible in the starlight. "Always." They lapsed into comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of nocturnal creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through cottonwood leaves. "I've been thinking about your offer," Clara finally said. "Working for the marshal's office?" Smith waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging. "Before I decide, there's something I need to know." She turned to face him directly. "Your real name?" He studied her for a long moment, weighing consequences and possibilities. "James Harker," he finally answered, "though I haven't used it in nearly 5 years." "Why tell me now?" "Because you asked." His simplicity disarmed her. "And because some secrets need to end for others to begin." Clara absorbed this, feeling the significance of his trust. "Thank you, James." The name felt strange on her tongue after knowing him only as Smith, yet somehow right, a gift exchanged between equals. They watched the stars together until the moon sank below the western horizon, each lost in private thoughts that somehow seemed to flow between them unspoken. Dawn arrived with soft pastels painting the eastern sky. Clara woke from a brief, unexpected doze to find Smith, James, already alert, coffee brewing over a carefully banked fire. "Riders coming," he announced without preamble. "From the west." Clara was instantly awake, reaching for the shotgun. "Steady," he cautioned. 2 horses, familiar gait. She strained to hear, then caught it. The distinctive rhythm of approaching hooves, unhurried but purposeful. A bird call floated across the distance, 3 notes followed by 2, the signal they'd arranged. "Mary and the Reverend," Clara breathed, relief washing through her. They emerged from the tree line minutes later, looking trail-worn but triumphant. Mary's face bore a fresh scratch across one cheek, and the Reverend's coat had acquired additional tears. But both were remarkably intact given the circumstances. "Glorious morning," the Reverend called as they dismounted. "The Lord provides water for the weary and reunion for friends." Mary immediately enveloped Clara in a fierce embrace that belied her formerly demure appearance. "We thought we'd lost you when those riders appeared." Explanations and experiences flowed like water as they shared meals and news. Mary and the Reverend had indeed been pursued, but had cleverly circled back behind their hunters, leaving false trails that had eventually led the frustrated trackers miles off course. Last we saw, they were heading toward Mexico, Mary concluded with obvious satisfaction. Following horse tracks, I reinforced with some clever boot prints and torn fabric. Resourceful, James acknowledged, the word carrying genuine appreciation. Methodist upbringing, the Reverend explained with twinkling eyes. Waste not, want not, applies to misdirection as well as material goods. Their laughter was interrupted by the Reverend suddenly raising his hand for silence. He tilted his head, listening intently to something beyond the other's awareness. Another rider, he announced. Coming fast. Single horse, heavy burden. James immediately moved to a defensive position, motioning the others to take cover. Clara positioned herself behind a large boulder, shotgun ready, while Mary produced a small derringer from her skirts. The approaching rider appeared moments later, his horse lathered with exertion. Prescott sat slumped in the saddle, one arm bound against his chest with what appeared to be a torn shirt sleeve. Behind him, secured with multiple ropes, sat their prisoner, conscious now and glaring with impotent fury. Prescott! Clara called, rushing to help him dismount. His normally immaculate appearance had surrendered completely to frontier pragmatism. Blood stained his makeshift bandage, and his face was gray with pain beneath a 3-day growth of beard. Apologies. For our delayed arrival, he managed with a shadow of his formal manner. Encountered some resistance to our travel plans. James examined the wound as Mary brought water. Bullet? Knife, Prescott corrected. Our friend had companions waiting at Broken Mesa. He nodded toward the prisoner. They were most determined to secure his release. Yet here you both are, the Reverend observed admiringly. Prescott's mouth twitched in grim amusement. Banking taught me negotiation skills. Sometimes negotiation requires collateral. He reached painfully into his coat, producing a folded document. Worth the trouble, I believe. James unfolded the paper, then looked up sharply. Where did you get this? Our esteemed prisoner proved unexpectedly communicative when properly motivated. Prescott accepted water gratefully from Mary. Seems Blackwater maintained detailed records of his operations. Names, dates, payments, all stored in a banker's vault in Tucson under an assumed name. Clara peered over James's shoulder at the document, a bank draft authorizing access to a specific safety deposit box, signed with a name she didn't recognize but clearly legitimate enough for James to recognize its significance. With this, James said slowly, we can connect Blackwater to every stage of the Carson City robbery, every accomplice, every murder. Including those involving children? Clara asked softly. James nodded, folding the document carefully. Everything. The implications settled over them. Even if Blackwater had somehow survived the mine collapse, his organization, his protection, his carefully constructed identity would all be systematically dismantled. The man might escape, but his power was broken. What happens now? Mary voiced the question they were all considering. Now, James replied, we complete the mission. Deliver the evidence and this gentleman's testimony to the federal judge in Carson City. And Blackwater? Prescott pressed. If he survived? A shadow crossed James's face. Then we finish what we started. The prisoner, who had remained sullenly silent until now, gave a harsh laugh. You're all dead already. You just don't know it yet. Clara turned to him slowly. What do you mean? The man's scarred face twisted into a malicious smile. Boss always has contingencies. Always. James grabbed the man's collar. Explain. Told you. Records in Tucson. What I didn't mention was who else has access. His smile widened. Every name you know, he knows better. Every hiding place you might use, already watched. Every route to Carson City, already covered. Prescott cursed with uncharacteristic vehemence. He's bluffing. Maybe, James conceded, releasing the prisoner. Maybe not. Can... Maybe, James conceded, releasing the prisoner. Maybe not. Can't afford to dismiss the threat. Silence settled over the group as they absorbed this new complication. The spring's tranquility seemed suddenly fragile, their momentary safety an illusion. "We adapt," Clara finally said, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's what we've all been doing since Coyote Flats." James studied her with newfound respect. "What do you suggest?" "We change the expected pattern." Her mind raced through possibilities, drawing on years of evasion tactics. If Blackwater survived and has people watching all routes to Carson City, we don't go to Carson City. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. The evidence must reach a federal judge. Yes, Clara agreed, but not by us delivering it directly. We create a diversion, multiple diversions, while the evidence travels by an unexpected courier. Mary caught on immediately. Someone Blackwater wouldn't suspect. Or someone he believes is already neutralized, Prescott added, wincing as he shifted his injured arm. Their prisoner watched this exchange with growing unease, his earlier smugness fading. These weren't the panicked reactions he'd anticipated. James paced a tight circle, considering. Split the evidence. Different routes, different carriers. Precisely, Clara confirmed. If Blackwater survived, he'll expect us to stay together for protection. 5 riders moving as a group are easy to track, easy to ambush. The Reverend nodded slowly. The scripture speaks of sending out disciples 2 by 2. Wisdom in those ancient words. But who takes what where? Mary asked practically. James crouched to draw a rough map in the dirt with a stick. 3 key destinations: Carson City Federal Court, Territorial Capital, Army Fort at Black Mesa. 3 destinations, 5 of us, Prescott calculated, plus 1 unwilling guest. Clara studied their crude map, memory stirring. There's another option. Nathan mentioned a newspaper editor in Silver Springs who was investigating bank fraud. Said the man couldn't be bought or scared off. Hammond, James confirmed, adding another mark to his dirt map. William Hammond. Reputation for integrity and a particular dislike of corrupt officials. 4 destinations, then, the Reverend said. Divine symmetry. Clara felt a plan crystallizing. Mary and the Reverend take the journal to Hammond in Silver Springs, most direct evidence of Blackwater's connection to the robbery. James nodded. Prescott's too injured for hard riding. He stays with me, heads for the Army Fort. Military escort will ensure his testimony reaches the proper authorities. Our prisoner? Mary asked. Comes with us, James decided. Too valuable to let out of sight. That leaves the banking documents, Clara noted. Most technical evidence requires financial expertise to interpret correctly. Prescott straightened despite his pain, which means they belong with me. And me, Clara added firmly. I know what to look for, what connects to Nathan's investigation. The plan took shape organically, each person contributing their particular knowledge or skill. By midday, they had established routes, contingency meeting points, and signals. The Reverend produced small vials of berry juice from his saddlebag, communion wine substitute for dry counties, which they used to create duplicate copies of key documents, insurance against loss or destruction. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they prepared to separate. The prisoner was secured on a lead rope attached to James's saddle, his hands bound but feet free enough to ride. Mary embraced Clara tightly. When this is over, she whispered, perhaps we could open that school we discussed. Clara returned. The embrace, surprised by how much she'd come to care for this woman who'd begun as a stranger in a stagecoach. First things first, get the evidence to Hammond, stay alive. God's will be done, the Reverend intoned. though his twinkling eyes suggested he believed in actively helping the Almighty along. Their final preparations complete, they mounted in pairs, Mary and the Reverend heading northwest toward Silver, Springs, Clara, and James with Prescott and the prisoner turning southeast toward Black Mesa. As their paths diverged, Clara glanced back once. The Springs greenery was already being swallowed by the vast desert, a momentary respite fading behind them. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also purpose and perhaps justice. She urged her horse alongside James's. If Blackwater survived, "We'll deal with that bridge when we reach it," he replied, eyes fixed on the horizon. Clara nodded, settling into the rhythm of the journey. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a blank canvas where their future, whatever it might hold, waited to be written. "Maybe," James conceded, releasing the prisoner. "Maybe not. Can't afford to dismiss the threat." Silence settled over the group as they absorbed this new complication. The Springs' tranquility seemed suddenly fragile, their momentary safety an illusion. "We adapt," Clara finally said, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's what we've all been doing since Coyote Flats." James studied her with newfound respect. "What do you suggest?" "We change the expected pattern." Her mind raced through possibilities, drawing on years of evasion tactics. If Blackwater survived and has people watching all routes to Carson City, we don't go to Carson City. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. The evidence must reach a federal judge. "Yes," Clara agreed, "but not by us delivering it directly. We create a diversion, multiple diversions, while the evidence travels by an unexpected courier." Mary caught on immediately. "Someone Blackwater wouldn't suspect. Or someone he believes is already neutralized," Prescott added, wincing as he shifted his injured arm. Their prisoner watched this exchange with growing unease, his earlier smugness fading. These weren't the panicked reactions he'd anticipated. James paced a tight circle, considering. "Split the evidence. Different routes, different carriers." "Precisely," Clara confirmed. "If Blackwater survived, he'll expect us to stay together for protection. 5 riders moving as a group are easy to track. Easy to ambush." The Reverend nodded slowly. "The scripture speaks of sending out disciples 2 by 2. Wisdom in those ancient words. But who takes what where?" Mary asked practically. James crouched to draw a rough map in the dirt with a stick. 3 key destinations: Carson City Federal Court, Territorial Capital, Army Fort at Black Mesa. 3 destinations? 5 of us, Prescott calculated, plus 1 unwilling guest. Clara studied their crude map, memory stirring. "There's another option. Nathan mentioned a newspaper editor in Silver Springs who was investigating bank fraud. Said the man couldn't be bought or scared off." "Hammond," James confirmed, adding another mark to his dirt map. "William Hammond. Reputation for integrity and a particular dislike of corrupt officials." 4 destinations, then," the Reverend said. "Divine symmetry." Clara felt a plan crystallizing. Mary and the Reverend take the journal to Hammond in Silver Springs, most direct evidence of Blackwater's connection to the robbery. James nodded. "Prescott's too injured for hard riding. He stays with me, heads for the Army Fort. Military escort will ensure his testimony reaches the proper authorities." "Our prisoner?" Mary asked. "Comes with us," James decided. "Too valuable to let out of sight." "That leaves the banking documents," Clara noted. "Most technical evidence requires financial expertise to interpret correctly." Prescott straightened despite his pain. "Which means they belong with me." "And me," Clara added firmly. "I know what to look for, what connects to Nathan's investigation." The plan took shape organically, each person contributing their particular knowledge or skill. By midday, they had established routes, contingency meeting points, and signals. The Reverend produced small vials of berry juice from his saddlebag, communion wine substitute for dry counties, which they used to create duplicate copies of key documents, insurance against loss or destruction. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they prepared to separate. The prisoner was secured on a lead rope attached to James's saddle, his hands bound but feet free enough to ride. Mary embraced Clara tightly. "When this is over," she whispered, "perhaps we could open that school we discussed." Clara returned, the embrace, surprised by how much she'd come to care for this woman who'd begun as a stranger in a stagecoach. "First things first, get the evidence to Hammond. Stay alive. God's will be done," the Reverend intoned, though his twinkling eyes suggested he believed in actively helping the Almighty along. Their final preparations complete, they mounted in pairs, Mary and the Reverend heading northwest toward Silver, Springs, Clara and James with Prescott and the prisoner turning southeast toward Black Mesa. As their paths diverged, Clara glanced back once. The Springs greenery was already being swallowed by the vast desert, a momentary respite fading behind them. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also purpose and perhaps justice. She urged her horse alongside James's. "If Blackwater survived, we'll deal with that bridge when we reach it," he replied, eyes fixed on the horizon. Clara nodded, settling into the rhythm of the journey. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a blank canvas where their future, whatever it might hold, waited to be written.